You can share the slides. Yeah, exactly. You used to get
All right. Before we get too started, can we get a volunteer to Jabberscribe and a volunteer to take some notes? Quick, everybody look away.
Be sure to look at the remote attendees. They can hear.
Yes. Oh.
So what exactly does a Jabberscribe do in the current situation?
Well, the traditional mode for anyone who is text only and listening to the remote audio stream, question mark? Yeah.
I can do that.
No, it's actually useful that we've had a few sessions this week where someone's audio, like just, we couldn't hear them, their microphone was on the fritz, so they said that. I can be Jabberscribe.
I think Ted was also volunteering, but thank you, Ted. Who would like to take some notes? Somebody want to bite the bullet? Can we get two people to take notes and back each other up? Sometimes it's a little less intimidating if you have a partner in crime. Yeah, you're about to be in front of here. Thank you very much.
How detailed level of notes do you want?
Minimum is anything that we appear to decide and outcomes from different questions and conversations.
Don't try to transcribe.
No need to transcribe, it's all on YouTube. Yeah. Exactly. All right, thank you very much, sir. All right, with that out of the way, let's get started. Welcome to Masque at IETF 114. This is the first in-person-ish meeting of the Masque Working Group. We had one in Vienna. That's the ish part. Diving right in. This session is being recorded. It will be on YouTube. Anything you say will be visible and audible to everyone else in the world. Make sure that you have already joined via the on-site tool. If you're here in person, if you're here remotely via the video stream, you already know where that link leads. As usual, you can get into the queue by raising your hand and leaving it by lowering your hand. And you can start and stop sending audio. Please state your full name before speaking and use headphones if remote. This is the IETF Notewell. You've already seen it by this point in the week, but please take a moment to make sure that you are familiar with. We do. Make sure that you're familiar with the Notewell. These are the terms under which we participate in the IETF. Pay extra attention to the parts about the code of conduct and how we treat ourselves and others. In addition, if you are here in the room at IETF 114, there is a mask policy in effect. You must be wearing a legitimate and good mask. If you do not have one, they are out at registration. You can just go pick one up. We have some fun, helpful links. This is mostly useful if you can actually click on them. And this is our agenda for today. We have a bunch of stuff. So we're going to start off by talking about Connect IP and moving some of that forward, hopefully in a pretty big way. And then we've got some new work that's being proposed in the form of a couple different individual drafts from different people. And at the end, we're going to take some time and talk about rechartering, because our current charter takes us right through the end of Connect IP and stops there. With that, Tommy, let's talk about Connect IP. Do you want to have your phone present some slides, or do you want me to click for you?
Let's see. Let's try this thing. Yeah. I'm already on QR code, so I'm asking to share slides.
Yep, perfect.
You going to approve me?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. No.
I granted it. It should just take it.
Yeah.
Could you just click through? That's hilarious. Click it again.
Did you grant? Did anyone select which?
It doesn't actually give you a place to
Oh,
select.
here we go. Now,
There you
now
go.
it works.
Much
Okay.
better. All right.
Cool. Can I control it? Yes, I can. All right.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tommy Pauly from Apple, and I am editing the Connect IP document. We have many authors, so thank you to the authors. If you recall from previous times, this was a joint effort of bringing different proposals together into one unified Connect IP. Earlier this week, we did have a meeting of the authors to try to hammer out some of the issues. And so the majority of this presentation will be trying to talk about the issues. We think we have resolutions for all of them, but we would like to get feedback from the room on that to see if there's anything we missed or things that we don't actually agree on. And hopefully we can actually go and merge all the pull requests and make some progress. So get excited, everyone. But before that, we do have some updates on testings and implementations. There was a Connect IP table at the hackathon. I myself was not there because I was on an airplane, but I was dutifully hacking on Connect IP on the airplane. Connect IP implementations were being made in several places on several different code bases. I don't think we've done cross implementation interop yet, but a lot of work is going on and we've learned things from trying to implement. David.
Sorry, I forgot to join the queue, David Scanasi. Just to add from the hackathon, folks, we were very darn close to interop, but everyone was realizing implementing the Masque bit is easy. Implementing the please kernel take this packet and put it where it's supposed to go is way less easy. So Magnus did a good summary at the end of the hackathon, and kind of what we said is we're going to finish this and reach interop in the coming weeks. And for the next hackathon in London, we plan to arrive having figured out the silly tunnel interfaces so we can really focus on the protocol stuff. Thanks.
Yep. But good progress was made all around. So thanks to everyone who was contributing to that. And we had lots of people who weren't authors on it. So thank you to all of them. All right. So first, just to summarize some of the recent changes in the latest version of the published draft. We had done work to try to improve text around how you handle the URI templates. A lot of this is lifted from Connect UDP as Connect UDP finalized, so we want to make sure we had parity there. We had issues with how address assign worked, when is that required or not, and so we tried to clarify that. We talked about the fact that ICMP is a good way to communicate errors. And we also talked about how to make sure you had enough MTU for your IPv6 traffic. So these are all good changes, but as you will see, a lot of the issues that we currently have open that we're trying to resolve are follow-ons to these. So a lot of it's in the kind of the same space, things that we realized were still left open. Alrighty, to get into the actual issues, the numbers up here are the GitHub issues. I have kind of all the content here to talk about in slides, but feel free to also look at the GitHub issues, and if we want to get really in depth, maybe we can switch over at some point. All right, so the oldest issue we have is one just talking about, do we need a default URI template? Kind of this was raised by the fact that Connect UDP has one. It defined this well-known Masque UDP, and the structure of that seemed to imply that you could put other things under this well-known /Masque. And so there's just kind of a question of, do we need this for Connect IP? I think there's good debate back and forth. In our last discussion, the authors kind of agreed that it actually probably does make sense, because there are going to be cases where you may be referring to a generic relay proxy box just by a name. And while it is very obvious that a browser that may only have a space for a name will definitely want to be able to do Connect and Connect UDP, there are use cases where it may need to do Connect IP as well. So there doesn't seem to be a reason to limit it from doing this. And so we just essentially have the exact same text that Connect UDP has for Connect IP to have the default URI template for that. In this case, the two parameters there are the target that you want to connect to, as well as the IP protocol that you want. And the default for both of these is just star and star for wildcards, which is already something that is supported by the URI template. Thoughts here? Any objections to having this be defined? Of course, no one has to use it. It's probably better to use a more specific one if you have a mechanism for that, but for the same reason that Connect UDP had the support for just the host name, it seemed fairly clear to be parallel. Martin Thompson. It's great. You can see when people are going to get in queue before they actually get in queue, because they pick up their phone and they tap a button.
Hey, Tommy.
Hello.
You're using well-known again.
Yeah, but this doesn't actually have to create a new well-known registration. It just updates the one that Connect UDP made.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that as well.
Sure. I mean, yeah, that's the part of it. But it's just like, if we already did this for Connect UDP.
So I think this goes to the question of how you plan to configure these things.
Yep.
And because you need a URI, what is it, pattern or template. Jeez, my brain's completely dribbling out the back of my head.
You need to know
already.
the path and the parameters.
Yeah. That provides a really useful way of distinguishing this from the other things you might put in configuration, because you have domain names in some cases and what appears to be something like a URI in those other cases.
Yeah.
So I tend to think that essentially requiring people to use the full template configuration is a better choice.
And why is this different from Connect UDP then?
It's not. Which is
So okay.
You just happen to be the first one to put it up on the slides.
I think we came to consensus on it for Connect UDP previously, and that was discussed in the group.
Okay.
So essentially, it's like, I don't see a good reason for this to go out of its way to not use the well-known that Connect UDP already established.
I guess if we're going with precedent, then fine.
That's and like, I agree that using a template, like if we have something like what Ben has for his directory, like, great, use that. But if you don't have that, I don't see a harm in this.
David Scanozzi, not really a well-known enthusiast.
But you are a well-known Masque enthusiast.
Nice. So I'm realizing that the chairs forgot a slight update, which is since the last IETF, HTTP datagrams and Connect UDP went through IETF last call, were approved by the IESG, and are now in the RFC editor's queue, which
Yes.
means that those documents are pretty much done. It also means that we can't change them, which is great. But
I mean,
Yeah.
all 48. You
no,
could-
yeah, but anyway. So anyway, that's really great. Like that was the first deliverable of the working group, which is
Yes.
great. We all did that together. Hooray! But yes, the two. That will cost you.
Exactly. So we better agree on this.
So anyway, yeah, the argument that convinced me as well was that it's consistent. So yep, chip it.
But thank you, David, for that note. That is a very good point. We have 2 of our 3 main documents have now progressed, and that is wonderful.
Hey, Ben Schwartz. So I sort of reluctantly agreed to the inclusion of this template in Connect UDP, and so I can reluctantly agree to the similar inclusion here.
Exactly. That's exactly the same book.
If necessary. But I do think it's like, I don't think it was a very good idea there. I think it's a little bit worse idea here. In particular, Connect UDP, when in the Connect UDP draft, the one that's in that's in the RFC editor's queue, always has a target. This draft, in my understanding, does not. Connect IP does not necessarily have a target. Now, Connect UDP also has recently, is hopefully about to gain support for non-target requests as well. So that will be somewhat parallel
For listener style.
for listener
Yeah,
style.
yes.
Um,
Yeah, because we need WebRTC.
But this has some weird effects here. Like the draft currently says the target is the target parameter may be specified in when populating the template, but that actually has to be changed.
So
This makes the
in the
target
PR,
template.
in the PR, it essentially says this default one always has it, but the existing text on the template and the parameters says that star is equivalent to empty.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying you're no longer actually following the URI template engine rules, because the URI template engine rules say that the target variable can be unspecified in the inputs to your template, in which case the rendering engine will do something. And in this case, what it will do is give you a pair of slashes back to back, right?
But so
It will not like,
the update to the text
right.
is that in general, regardless of actually the well-known or not, if your URI template puts these parameters within the path segment and not the query segment of parameters, because there are the 2 flavors you can do there
Right.
that are allowed for this. If they're in the path one, then you must not have it be empty. You must have it be a star.
So that's even worse, because that means that now I have to introspect inside this, like as a client, I get a URI template back and I have my variables that I want to substitute into it. I can't just take my URI template and my variables and hand them to a URI template engine. I actually have to go disassemble the template and figure out which template structure is being used here in order to figure out whether I need to
I think
do
that's kind of a
this
problem.
asterisk replacement.
So that's a problem if we allow them being in the path at all.
I
Regardless
agree,
of well
but
knowledge.
it's not a problem even in this case. You can have empty path segments in HTTP
Oh, you just do
URLs.
/
You would just have // I'm just telling you that
/ Sure.
it's ugly and that it creates weirdness if you have this now ambiguity of like sometimes it's star or sometimes it's empty string.
You could also just make it always be star and disallow empty string.
And in which case you're saying the target parameter is
Is
mandatory
always there.
and like
Yes,
you
that's
must-
fine.
yeah.
I think that's a perfectly fine
Okay.
resolution.
And the other thing is
That's
IP proto is that sorry, what is IP
That's
proto?
the IP protocol number,
Okay.
which can be anything, or you can say, no, I only want to open up for this.
Okay.
Like I want ICMP only.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that case, I mean, well, anyway, there's some fiddliness that needs to be sorted out there.
Okay. Martin.
Yeah, so if you put the slash inside the curly braces, things get interesting, and may solve the problem here, provided that your target and protocol, provided that you don't have a protocol if you don't have a target. So if you get the order right,
But what if you said I want to open up everything that does ESP because I want to run IPsec over this, but I want to send it to everywhere, but I only care about this protocol.
so you are saying that you could have one or both, with
Be
the
empty.
one being
Be
either
wild
one
card.
of them.
Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't work then. So it turns out if you read RFC, what's the number again? 6570.
The
There's-
URI template one?
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways you can spin this.
Joy.
And perhaps that should have been the case for the other one anyway. But essentially what you do is you put the slash inside the curly braces, and
So you
it
do
will put the
target
path-
slash IP
it will,
proto.
it will make the path component optional at that point.
I see. So you don't need double slashes.
So you wouldn't end up with double slashes or stars or any other sort of weird gobbledygook in there. You just, if you have a target, then that component is added. If you have a protocol, then that's added. The only problem there is that
No.
you need, in the case where both of them are optional, then you have to have some way of distinguishing between the two of them, which is kind of awkward.
And we could also
How to
just
manage
go
it.
it's always there and you just put a star when you want it to be open-ended.
Yeah. Okay.
To make it very explicit that like, hey, I'm trying to open up a full tunnel VPN here.
I'll need to have a look at the URI grammar before I can say that I'm comfortable with that.
Sure. That's fine.
David Skenazy, like I did a bunch of reading, and please correct me if I misread, to figure out if like / was allowed or a star was allowed. And when it came down to is / inside the path is allowed, but there's a bunch of software that normalizes it and then it's going to remove one / and then you're going to have a sad day. So we should avoid / and star seemed fine. The reason I'm okay with the text as it currently is, because Ben has a valid concern that you don't want the implementation of this that's using a generic URI template library to have to figure out if they're in the path or not. But in that case, you just always put a star. Like you're going to have this variable,
Or
anyway.
it knows it has a target that it's going to. Like it knows what to fill in.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, yeah, it's kind of fugly, but at least it's consistent with Connect UDP. Whatever.
How about, so what I would propose here is this, like, I think this particular issue, we have agreed, like, we don't love the well-known, but like, it's consistent. So like, we came to agreement on that. This other issue that Ben brought up, I think is a separate issue of like, having the stuff in the path component and being ambiguous about can it be empty, can it be a star, or like having it be different between where it is and that, like that's the grossness. So could we open up a new issue to essentially just determine if do we really allow empty and that variability between empty and star?
Well, the reason to allow empty is that if you're using a level 3 URI template, and this is why everyone should be going wide-eyed, and I hate URI templates, but we decided that that's what we wanted to use, is so the level 3, because these are like Pokemon for some reason, is that you can specify a question mark target. And it'll say, if it's empty, it won't do anything. And if it's there, it'll do question mark target equals what you put in.
Yeah.
And so that ability to save those bytes is kind of neat. Like at the end of the day, whatever, 4-star, who cares? Just whatever's simplest to implement. That's all I care about.
Maybe we decide that like the other way you do it is like if you recognize, like it's always technically star, but like if you recognize in the query string that you're about to put something equals star, you can just drop it on the floor if you don't want to spend the bytes on it.
Which is
It's the same thing.
What the current PR does.
Yes.
And that's why I like it. It's simple. Yeah, this is gross. This is not the grossest thing we've done. It's not the grossest thing we will do. Me.
Oh man, I can hear you. Okay, sounds good. So I think it warrants a bit more discussion just to make sure we're happy with that, but this particular issue seems okay. Next one. So we had a couple different issues around some of the new text that was talking about ensuring we had enough MTU. Previously, the text provided 3 different options, I believe, for how you validate you have enough MTU to get things like minimum IPv6 packets through. And like one way was you know you have a direct connection from the client to the proxy. There's nothing else in between you. You know you padded your initial quick to a large enough size. You know you have room in the datagrams, and then you don't need to do anything else to make sure you have a minimum MTU. I think there's a middle one that was trying to say like, oh, you may have intermediaries, and if you coordinate sufficiently with your intermediaries to make sure you have enough MTU, then this could also work. And then the fail-safe was, if you can't guarantee that you don't have intermediaries and that they have enough room for your minimum size packets, you should do some ICMP through this to make sure that you have sufficient path MTU. Intermediaries are messy and gross, and so as we were talking, we were like, let's try to just like, maybe let's just ditch the text that says, oh, maybe you could coordinate with your intermediary. So we just say like, either you guarantee from end to end that you have a big enough quick connection to hold your minimum size, or you do path MTU discovery through the tunnel, and that's it for this. Ben is going to get in the queue once he can press the button. Oh. Corey, hello.
Hiya. I wondered if we need to be a little bit careful with A, since we're tunneling other things, because the class properties could change. And whilst that's okay and known for quick, it's not known for the protocols over quick. Do we need to word around that in some way?
Sorry. Okay. Can you just repeat, Dave, if you understood and you have a response, I'd like to get.
To answer Gory's question, David Skenazy here. Let's say you have an end-to-end quick connection, and you start with padding quick initials to 13, whatever the number is in there.
Yes.
You'll be fine.
Yep.
But if you implement dynamic PMTUD inside quick,
Yes.
and your quick MTU goes down to something below that, then you need to nuke the connect IP stream. Maybe we just need to add a sentence for that, because our implementation
Yes.
doesn't do dynamic PMTUD. So we don't have this problem. But if you do, just adding a sentence saying, if you detect that your MTU goes lower, like I don't think we need to say anything, because we already have text that says if you detect that the MTU is not sufficient, you have to nuke the tunnel.
But
anyway.
so if you're not doing dynamic PMTUD, that means you start out with your initial size, but that's not a guarantee that subsequent packets that you're sending make sure you maintain that size. So like if the path MTU changes on you and you just don't notice, it is possible that it goes
Then like
down.
your quick connection's gonna just like buckle
right, and
over
then
at
you'll
some
send the
point.
packets and they'll just get lost, and you'll realize that you're losing packets, and
Yeah.
things go.
So I think maybe the assumption in quick is that that's all okay. But if we're tunneling other things over quick, then maybe that's a bit surprising that suddenly everything just disappears. I'm sure you work out what to say.
Yeah, and just to add, I think you're right, but at the same time, that's also true of Ethernet. And like, if that happens at some point, like,
I think it may be worth adding a sentence, and so if we can take a note in the PR just to say like, not even necessarily normative text, but just like note that if your quick connection itself, and like if that link loses its MTU, stuff can go wrong, and you probably want to just kill that stream if that happens. That is that
So,
makes-
okay,
yeah.
Ben Schwartz. So okay, you must do PMTUD over the tunnel, and if PMTUD says less than 1280 or whatever,
Then you
what-
can't do V6.
What do you? Yeah. Okay. So that's
And that's actually, I think, Miriam's question. Is
Okay.
what do you do?
right.
Miriam.
I mean, is that? I haven't seen maybe the very latest text. Is it very clear? Like, go away.
Well, so that is one of, I think that's issue 62, and I think Mary mentioned that may not be clear enough in this latest PR, so we may want to update that.
I didn't see it at all in the PR. I think we omitted, like we discussed it, and it's not in the text.
Yeah, the issue says we should say that you must close the stream, and we were not clear when that was added.
I mean, maybe I need to pull it up, but I'm 99% sure that in the PR it says if you detect that it's not sufficient, you must abort the stream.
I didn't see it when I looked just now.
Okay, maybe I'm
Just
going,
add that sentence.
maybe
Then-
I'm just crazy. But okay, but let's just add it then. I think everyone's okay with adding it.
So the whole text says like, because we're sending everything over datagrams, that's the only option, but like the other option is to send it over streams.
I think when we talked before, we don't necessarily want to go in that direction. Like,
So-
you could have like some way to negotiate, like, I would like these to fail over to become reliable, but I don't think that's the base behavior.
Yeah, that's fine. I just don't think I want a must there, or like the must should be bound to like using datagrams or whatever. I don't know. Like if you really want to use, if you want to do this, right? If you want to detect this and then fail over to streams, you should be able to do it.
I see. So it's like, you must abort the stream unless you have some other mechanism
So
that is
this,
unyet
this
specified.
sounds like a must, but we know you won't. The reality is that 98% of flows are going to tolerate this just fine, and therefore, as a client implementer, I think it would be very hard to convince yourself, like, yeah, I'm just going to shut everything down and brick the user's device because, like, you know, I'm not technically in compliance with IPv6 anymore. As opposed to like, well, you know what? I know I'm not in compliance anymore, but
Those packets probably won't get out over the network if there's runt packets.
well, I mean, so the
Or-
MTU
no,
falls a
you're right.
little
No, they're
bit.
too small. You're right. No, that's fine. Yeah.
The
Yeah, I
MTU
guess,
falls
yeah.
a little bit below 1280. Most things are still going to
Because
survive.
most
and
because
work
most of the
fine.
applications on top of you won't be
So-
double checking that they have enough room.
Most applications aren't running all the way up to the MTU limit. The ones that are usually smart enough to have a little bit of PMTUD of their own in them and can
Yeah.
tolerate it and back
Okay.
off. And
Well, if you're using V4, that's fine. You don't need to tear this up.
V4 technically has the same problem if you're, you know, at 576 or something. But my point is, to me, the thing that makes the most sense to just try to be as like limited as possible here is to say, like, but you should do PMTUD over the tunnel to find out the MTU. If the MTU falls below 1280, you are no longer a compliant IPv6 implementation, and what you do with that information is up to you.
We could make it a non-normative statement of essentially saying, like, if you detect that you are not able to provide valid IPv6 over this, you can abort the stream. And just say, like, you can, and if you have something else you want to do, like be out of compliance or tunnel them over reliable datagrams, knock yourself out.
I'm fine with any of those because at the end of the day, we're not going to implement any of these. We're going to pad the quick initial packets,
Exactly.
and that's going to be enough.
All right, so it sounds like, are we okay then, just for like the minutes of the issue, saying like, make this option a should do PMTUD and just say you can close the stream when you hit an issue
So
as the default suggestion.
I'm okay with that. Since Magnus, since you filed the issue, what are your thoughts?
But Myriad Frau is one of them too.
You're okay with it? Yeah.
About to find out.
Yeah, Magnus Westlund. I just want to see that we have we don't have any loopholes in this, so to say. And if you make it should without having that should very hard specific what it means, you would end up in another problem. So, but yeah, if you're actually adding that, saying, okay, and the problem really is the HTTP intermediaries here, because even if you're padding and you're uncertain if you have an HTTP intermediary, you would run into this problem. So that's why the must is supposed to be there to cover that situation.
But like, I mean, so to follow the rule that if you ever say should, you need to give her kind of the explanation of why would it not be. So like, we could even just be very explicit, like you should do this, otherwise you could end up in a situation where you're not a compliant IPv6 tunnel. Okay, David, what's your proposal?
I have a proposal that I think everyone might be okay with, which is, you know, what we do here. Never something that everyone loves. Is to say, if you detect that the path MTU goes below the limit, and you sorry, let me rephrase. If you are sending your IP packets over datagram and the path you detect that the path MTU is no longer sufficient, you must close the stream because you're in violation of the RFC. Like, you can send them another way, like streams. That allows that.
You could also not detect it.
You could also not detect it. And like at the end of the day, we're just we're doing lip service to the IPv6 RFC. We're doing it right, and in practice, it'll be fine, and it won't be a pain to implement for everyone. I think this is a good middle ground.
All right. Connect IP, doing right by IPv6.
Oh wow, I'll bring that to Eric Vinke. Okay, is everyone okay with that?
Yeah, write it up.
Sold.
Okay. Thank you for everyone's input so far. Next one. All right, this one I think should be easier. Previously, we mentioned you can do ICMP when you have errors, like, let's say you negotiated a full tunnel with the other side, and then you told them, here's your source address with an address assigned. And you say, here are the routes you can send to with a route advertisement. And then the other side just starts sending garbage that's not in that violates your ACLs and they're being bad. That may be intermixed with good traffic. You don't need to tear down your entire connection or your entire stream to them. How do you let them know they were sending bad things? And you could invent a bunch of capsules, but we think that just sending ICMP errors back is the right thing to do because they have the correct error codes and that's the right thing for this layer. It was kind of non-specific. So the changes we did is we gave specific examples of like, hey, probably if you're trying to send to something you don't have a route for, you should send destination unreachable with the error code of like, you can't reach that thing. I forget which, it's like number 5. And same thing for if you send a bad source. And if you send a packet that's too large, or then you get the correct error for that. So just do the obvious thing for those. And then the only other part of this that's I think a bit more interesting is it essentially says that you should, if you are giving route advertisements to the peer, which not everyone does, but like in a peer-to-peer VPN case, both sides give it to each other. In the client to proxy case, just the proxy gives it to the client. That should include in the protocols that are listed as allowed, ICMP. But then essentially, if you are not giving routes to the other side, like the client does not give routes to the server, it essentially says that it is always assuming that you essentially always need to be prepared to receive ICMP packets. So even if you are just creating a IP tunnel for ESP, you need to handle ICMP over this thing because that's how you get your errors. Any issues with that? Martin Duke has issues with that.
Just to clarify this is that the proxy. By the way, Martin Duke, Google, no hats. So to clarify, the proxy ought to forward these ICMP messages in the tunnel, and the client must be able to handle that, whether or not they do anything with it.
It's not necessarily, I guess we don't say anything about whether or not you need to forward them if you receive them from the outside. It's more like you can generate them on the proxy to tell, like, the client sends you as the proxy something that they're not allowed to send to, and like you can generate ICMP back to them of like, stop, you did the wrong thing.
Okay, fair enough. But the client must be able to handle that. Like prepared to receive is a weird, like you shouldn't crash. Well, you should never crash,
like, I mean, okay. Like you shouldn't have done this anyway. Like probably what you're going to do is just log an error, because like if this proxy server told you you're only allowed to send to this other IP address and you send to a different one, like you have problems. Mm-hmm. So like I don't know what it means to like must handle it. It's like it's just like you will receive this. I don't know.
Okay, well, all right. So I mean, like this is kind of a wordsmithing thing, but like if without further negotiation the server might generate these things, then the client has to be like
prepared to receive them. Like it's not an error if I get an ICMP
Exactly.
packet. Right. Okay.
It's almost like saying like, if we've defined all the basic quick frames, I don't think we have like a client must support receiving this quick frame and not crash when they see this number. It's like,
Yeah.
It's just the protocol.
All right. All right. Okay. So the point is these might arrive and you'd be prepared for it. That's cool. Thanks.
Alex.
Hi, Alex Chernohowski, Google. I just wanted to clarify that the text that Tommy has on the slides here about the language is not the language which is in the PR, I don't think. So I think the comment around wordsmithing is more about the slide. Please look at the PR if you think the text needs more wordsmithing.
Yes. These are conversation topics, not the literal text.
Ben Schwartz, I just wanted to try to understand whether this really covers all the uses of ICMP. Like, does this mean that I can, run traceroute through a tunnel whose IP protocol says TCP?
I think like yes, but that doesn't guarantee that it's going to forward it. And like I don't think it says anything about whether or not you will discover a full.
Well, lots of ICMP black holes on the on the internet.
Right.
We can
be an ICMP black hole.
Like, we could say like you should not black hole ICMP. That might be nice, but the important thing is like I can send ICMP.
Yes.
Including and I can receive ICMP replies from source IPs that aren't the target, right? Because traceroute. In traceroute, the source IPs are not the target IP. Like, is that also something that works?
That's a good point.
In this framework, or does our format compression lose the source IP?
Well, there's no compression here.
Okay.
You would absolutely get it. I would like to hear other authors' opinions on this because I don't care. I could either say, like, either you say you only allow it by default from your peer. Otherwise, you just say you just allow all ICMP and just do with it what you will.
I'm noticing Miria's ghost is in the queue. I find that funny. So to answer Ben's question, I agree. I think we should just add a note that the source address can come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And in terms of black holing, we already say that like connect IP endpoints operate as routers. So if someone wants to knock themselves out and read the hundreds of pages of RCs that have been written on what a router is supposed to do, you should, but one of them is don't black hole ICMP. So I don't think we need to say anything.
I mean, I think practically it's fairly likely that a lot of clients will just black hole ICMP if the proxy tries to randomly trace route through them. But
true, yeah.
That's probably okay.
Oh, that's the other point I wanted to add is you don't need ICMP to do traceroute. You can, like if you're sending TCP, you can send TCP packets with a small hop count, and then the ICMP is the response, not the sent packet.
That's true. That's true.
I think I slightly disagree. So this is only saying like, even if you didn't ask for ICMP, you might get it.
Yes.
So if you want to actually use ICMP and you want to send ICMP messages, you should ask for it. You should tell your proxy to do it.
I mean, I agree that like if my intent is I want to open a thing so I can ping this random server and that's all I want to do, just saying I want to open up ICMP makes sense. If let's say what I'm doing is like I'm trying to open up SCTP to this particular server. I think if I have an error reaching that comes back as ICMP, just receiving the ICMP all the way through is nice. I shouldn't have to explicitly say, please also open up ICMP for me.
Yes.
And so that's okay here. So then I guess the only other case is like, if I want to send random pings and ICMP-based trace routes and also use SCTP, why wouldn't I just open up a request for each of those or like have my tunnel be big enough to do both? And that's kind of just like good practice with the proxy, I think.
So Magnus Westlund, yeah, I mean, from the discussion we had, why I brought this up, etc., was really to ensure that you first, the endpoint can send ICMP back to the client if it sends something bad.
Yes.
And two, also get the feedback from beyond the proxy when if it, for example, reach port unreachable or something like that, the packet too big, they should be returned back. If the the proxy can actually map it back to this request. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Violent agreement.
That's the same, right? If the proxy receives an ICMP, you don't know if it's the one that you sent, if you send the same to the client or if you generate a new one. I mean, this is the same use case.
no, but there are cases like because we're saying that the ICMP is used as an error message for certain cases for just a request, it might be the proxy that generates only for the tunnel. It doesn't comes from the interface beyond on external side of
But if it comes from the outside, you just don't know. It's the ICMP you get from the proxy. It's the same.
Well, I mean, the addresses on the ICMP could be different. Like you could tell, like, oh, this came from my source address of the peer I was trying to send to, or it came from my proxy's IP address.
Okay, but like, yeah, you cannot stop it. You cannot.
Yeah, right. You can't stop it. You can receive it from either place, and that's okay.
Hi, Alex again. This is actually an area which I tried to push back on 2 IETFs ago when we started adding IP proto originally because of the complexities around this. I think that the only way we can resolve this is that you can't actually allow sharing the same IP address with different IP protos if you want to support these sort of hard to distinguish ICMP messages and align them up with the different tenants on the same IP. So like, I think one thing which is very clear is that having the proxy and the client be able to have over their direct point-to-point link exchange ICMP about that is very easy to do. But the moment you start saying, oh, I have an IP proto restriction that says I can only do TCP over the tunnel and also want to get ICMP messages from the far end, we need to make sure that we are able to restrict that down to the messages which are identifiable for the like 3 tuple there.
I think that is a good point because these error cases are such that the proxy can recognize, oh, that ICMP was in response to this packet that I sent, and that came from this tunnel.
Right.
And essentially, it's like, I think the proxy should have the choice to only forward those, or if it thinks you have full control over this IP address, forward you all ICMP.
Right. So I think the minimum behavior that we need to guarantee is you will always get ICMP error reporting on the point-to-point link. Regardless of what IP proto that you have requested. If you want to guarantee that you also get all ICMP messages for this IP, you must also request ICMP for this IP proto. However, advanced proxy may be aware of the 3 tuples and 5 tuples and forward you additional ICMP information.
Right. If you want to guarantee you have a full tunnel, ask for a full tunnel. You may also get some other ICMP if the proxy is smart. Great. I think we can clarify that a little bit in the text, but this is useful. Thank you. Woohoo. Okay. This one was meaty. So previously, I think last IETF, we were trying to fix up address assign. So we fixed
Pause for 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
Anthony, you're requesting slides, but I assume that means you wanted to be in the queue?
Yeah.
Sweet. One last comment, and then we'll keep going.
One last comment. Like, hi, I'm new to this Masque thing, but I know the ESP and IPsec world. RFC 4301 has a text what kind of ICMPs you should allow, and that's basically looking in the payload, because ICMP errors should have a payload part of the packet which you send forward, and you look at that payload, and then you decide was it allowed by the Masque.
That sounds like a very good text to copy.
Yeah. Not only will allow it if the forward packet was allowed, then you do the reverse lookup. And if the reverse lookup supports it, then you allow those only errors.
Yeah, so that's 4301?
So the trace RFC 4301 is a text for it, and I can support you to that.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think I remember that text.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely add more text if that's helpful, but like you can just decide to ignore all ICMP messages or whatever. Like you can do whatever you want. The only point is like you have to be prepared to get them.
Yes. Yeah, but I think it's good advice though, because this is that's a well-behaved proxy that's acting as a very nice tunnel. All right, so back to address requests. Previously, we tried to fix address assign, and I think we did a good job there. Magnus raised some good issues explaining how address request had semantic ambiguity problems. So this really isn't too much of a problem in a VPN to VPN site to site case in which sides are assigning each other addresses, requesting addresses, assigning routes bidirectionally, and they're just like all free form tunneling. It is more of a problem if you are kind of just like client to proxy opening something out, because previously the address request was just like an optional thing that you send if you want a particular address, and if you don't want a particular address, you don't send it. It was obviously the proxy would never send that to the client because the client can't assign addresses. But the sensible place, if you do care about your address, is to send the capsule for address request at the beginning, right after your actual request. The server has no idea if you're going to send that or not. And so it will receive the request, maybe give you a 200, but like how long is it going to wait before it checks if you have an address request capsule or not before it gives you an address assign? Like, it was completely ambiguous. And you could come up with some rule of like, oh, you just negotiate out of band whether or not you do that, but that was gross. There was discussions about, okay, you can add a header to say I'm going to send this capsule, but that also is problematic. The proposal here is just to say you always send an address request if you want an address assigned. So there are different models of Connect IP. Not everyone needs an address assigned. Like, for example, like the proxy server never receives an address assigned from a client, so it doesn't send an address request. But if the client wants an address assigned, it needs to send an address request. If the client out of band already knows what IP address it has assigned to it and they don't need an address assigned, then it doesn't need to send it. So it's just kind of very parallel. Like, if you want an address assigned, you better send an address request. This also opened up kind of a nice property that the address request, previously you would only send if you had a specific prefix you wanted to be in or a specific address you wanted. But if you don't care, you send all zeros for your actual addresses. That's nice because now you can say explicitly, like, I want a v4 address assigned to me, or I want a v4 and a v6, or I just want a v6. And you can also specify within that the prefix. So you can even have just all zeros, but like you say, I want a /64, or I want a /128. Or you can give the semantics of what you're expecting to get back. And then, of course, the proxy can assign you something more specific within that, or you can just use that as input as a hint. So I think that works pretty nicely. One other tweak here, just to make sure that if you're asking for v4 and v6, or if you're being assigned v4 and v6, you had it all at the same time, was that just like we did for the route advertisement capsule, where we just had the capsule be a array of repeating route structures that have the different protocol families, the address request and address assign capsules can contain multiple addresses. So, the first one just says, oh, this is a v6 address, and then it has the v6 address. So then it's followed by a v4 address, and that's all in one capsule. Any issues with this? This was the hardest for us to actually discuss, so hopefully we'll have consensus on it.
David Skenazi. So no, I don't have any issue with this. I just wanted to, this was a hard one for us to reason about, and it's a really hard one to explain. So if you're wondering what the hell Tommy's talking about, don't worry, that's normal. But at least all of the editors thought about it and thought that was a nice solution that was really both simple and just like avoided a lot of the caveats that we were running into. So just wanted to say, like, we're on the same page. I think this is a good way forward.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that like looks kind of like, oh, that's kind of simple and straightforward, but yeah, that's after the fact.
Yeah, maybe a diagram would have helped, but we'll see what MT thinks. He's taking the long way around. I don't know if that's something I should be worried about.
So have you changed the spelling at all?
Changed the what?
I'm looking at the spec. I'm looking at the discussion here.
So this is a PR. It's not merged in yet.
You said issue 66. Oh, 70. All right, I'm looking at it now.
The PR does change the wire format.
The wire format just it changes the capsule number and then it just allows it to be repeatable. The interior of the capsule is now repeatable as opposed to being a one singleton.
So it's repeatable, and you have to include the address family as well?
You already
on
have
each-
the
on
address
each one?
family.
So it's address family, prefix length.
So there's capsule
and
type,
value.
capsule length, then address family, address prefix, address family, address prefix, address family, address prefix.
Okay, I think I can probably get behind that.
It was like, because I already had the parser for the other one, it was pretty easy to just put a while loop around it, and it worked.
My name is Westland. One thing I realized here is that in this case, a parser fulfillment must be okay. Maybe we need to be explicit about that. Because if you're asking for both a v4 and v6 address, and the proxy can only give you either of them,
Yes.
you need to be fine with that. So
Yeah, that's a good, we could add a sentence for that of just saying like, remember, just because you ask for something does not mean you get it. And that is true for both Connect IP and Life. Right, well, this says if you want something, ask for it, but you may not get it. This is really just reflective of life. All right. Okay, no. Miria.
Yeah, so I wasn't at the editor meeting, unfortunately, but I read the PR and I thought it very good, but I just want to confirm something. So this assume a little bit of like pre-configuration knowledge about if you are supposed to request an address or not or whatever.
I think, so by default, you request an address if you want to be able to send.
Yeah.
It leaves it open such that if you had some extremely specialized deployment where you were like completely out of band, you just know you always have this, it's a static IP. I don't know what it is, like, or potentially even if you have an extension in the future where you say, I don't actually put in source IPs, I let the proxy write my source IP for me, I know I don't need to actually write anything here, I don't need to do it. So
yeah,
it gives us that wiggle room, but
but
if
that
you're
means,
implementing the base draft, you will almost certainly always send an address request.
yeah, but that also means like if you want to do something else and you want to have this pre-configuration in there, then it's kind of for all requests, like because you cannot provide it dynamically, so like you have to just like statically configure it.
Well, so I mean, just to be pedantic here, while if you expect to get an address assigned, you should send an address request. That does not mean that you cannot get an unsolicited address assigned. Nothing prevents any side from sending that.
I understand that it works. I'm just saying it's like it gives you less flexibility or makes your configuration a little bit harder. I'm just trying to understand.
Well, let me
like how.
So the idea there is, say, think of it kind of like DHCP. If you don't ask the DHCP for an address, you're not going to get one, and you're probably not going to get. You might not necessarily get the one you ask for if someone else has taken it. So the idea is if you're expecting it to assign you an address, you send that. But let's say you're a VPN and in your VPN config file, you put a static IP address, you're not going to send DHCP over the VPN. So that's what it's there for. It kind of replicates traditional IP networking.
Or if you've agreed with your VPN that you just put all zeros for your source address and it rewrites your packets for you, that's also fine.
Okay, that's more insane, but
good. I mean, as some fancy compression thing, you're just like, I just don't care what my address is. Give me one. Whatever.
Yeah, all I was asking is like basically if you have this configuration, then basically you have to take it like for all your requests. Like it's not like you can do it on a request basis.
Cool. Ben is next.
Yeah, so first of all, does this add a round trip to the time before I can send my first packet?
No, but it's a good question. So this goes in the same flight as your request. So like, I mean, it's just like the capsule is back to back with your request. You don't wait to receive the 200.
What source IP do I use?
So Connect IP already has an issue with knowing what source IP to send from in general.
Yeah.
So actually, in some ways, this makes it better. So if I'm thinking of like full tunnel VPN or whatever, I don't know what you do, but like if I'm requesting a specific address because let's say I knew a specific address I'd received on another stream previously, I could, optimistically say, please give me that same address. I will send my initial packets from it. You may drop them. You may give me a different address. And so like it can fail over to something longer, but this does not make anything worse, certainly with regards to when you can start sending packets.
Okay, I think I would just like it to be possible to just send packets on the first flight, basically, if you're willing to tolerate that. But
I agree.
Okay.
You can but they may be dropped if you choose a bad source address, or we can also do a thing where the proxy can rewrite your source address for you if it doesn't like it. And
regardless of that, I looked at the issue and I noted that there was this question of the prefix length. So it seems like maybe this isn't entirely settled, but what is the rule for the prefix length on the all zeros?
So the capsules themselves, which you send at our address request, like the address assign, are of a structure that is repeated struct with protocol, address, prefix length.
Right.
And so you specify in your request the prefix length.
So can I set it seems like all zeros means doesn't have a preference.
It means that I don't have a preference for the specific address I'm going to receive, but I can express a preference for the prefix length I would like to receive.
I think that is not compatible with the IPv6 specification, maybe not with IPv4 either.
How?
The IPv6 reserves all zeros /128. That is the only reserved address for this purpose in IPv6.
So this is not expressing an address. So think of it like, so in IPsec, it's like a traffic selector. This is a way of expressing desired range.
Right.
It is not like, I'm not saying I own this address. Like
right, but 000/64 is a valid valid subnet. Well, or at least
if you're allowed to assign that, the other side may assign it to you.
Right, but now there's an ambiguity. Am I actually asking for it, or am I asking? Is zeros here a dummy address, and I'm not asking for it for real, or?
So sorry to jump in on the wire format here. You send 128 bits here.
Right.
So sending all zero is a dummy. Yes, that is a special thing, and that happens to be resolved. Reserved.
Okay.
And hopefully that resolves things.
So what you're saying is that if I want to request the 00/64, I would send 64 bits of 0 and then 64 bits of 1.
Okay.
And it says
I think that I can retract this. We can and say this is safe because there is at least one reserved IP address in any range whose IP identifier is all zeros, and therefore any such subnet is non-allocatable.
And so essentially saying that this wildcard must be all zeros all the way through to the end. Fine. All right, Jonathan.
Jonathan Lennox. I was my eyebrows raised slightly when you said you could send a unsolicited address assign even if you didn't get an address request, because I wondered what happens if a client sends address assign unsolicited to a proxy.
It would ignore it.
I mean, is there a way to
really
say?
You can close the stream.
I mean, I guess should there be a way of saying if you get an address assigned when you're not able to have your address assigned, you should? Does it explicitly say that? Close the stream, or does it need to say that? Or
I don't think so. So we've talked about error handling in general. I think it's certainly plausible that some future extension that wants more complex semantics for different types of assignments could add some, I rejected this capsule, I rejected that. But I think if you do something like try to assign your server address, it just decides if it either ignores it or says you're a misbehaving client and closes on you. I don't know. Martin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think many things. But probably not about that. I was thinking about another question that I had.
Yeah. Oh, okay,
No,
sure.
go
Go for
ahead.
it.
Yeah.
So just because you send an address assign, it doesn't mean that you get the address assign. So if you receive an address assign, you just should send a request. No, sorry, the other way around. If you get a request, doesn't mean that you actually get that IP address, right? So if you get a request, you should just send an assign with the IP address that you assigned.
Yes, and vice versa. Like if the client sends a proxy, like I've assigned you this address, what you were telling proxy is, hey, I'm a client and I will accept if you send packets to me from that address. Like proxy is like, okay, I don't really care. I'm not going to send anything to you anyway from that address, but thanks for letting me know. It's like you can give out your phone number to whoever you want, but that doesn't mean they'll call you.
So another way of thinking of that is the client says, here's an address assigned. Can you please advertise this over BGP and for me and establish a route to it? I think the answer is just no.
Yeah.
The question I got up to ask was, will you always receive an assign in response to a request?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Can you expect to see some sort of indication that when you ask for something, the server has acknowledged that? Because this particular arrangement has this weird property whereby in a lot of cases the server is just going to go, here, have a bunch of addresses as soon as the connection is established.
Yes.
And it doesn't really depend on seeing a request in that case.
Right.
This is a bug.
Well, so the way I'm thinking about it currently is that, I think we're pretty clear that you are not allowed to send. Well, sorry, you are not guaranteed that packets you send will be accepted until you have received both an assign and a route advertisement. And so on the client, you can wait around for those. And essentially, like, I don't know if I don't get it immediately, if it's because you're taking a while to actually figure out what address I have. I'll have to have some timeout there. I know it's a reliable stream, so I know you received the thing. So we can say, like, the server must eventually reply once it can actually assign it, otherwise it should close the string to be nice.
So I think this is a bug of something that we accidentally glazed over when we were talking about this.
Okay.
I think when we made it such that I think in the previous version of a draft, address request always got an address assigned response, but now that we've made it repeated and fallible, I think we need to define that if you get a request that cannot be satisfied because we want to give you no addresses back whatsoever, we still need to indicate.
Okay, that's fine.
That you
That's fine.
with an empty address
Yes.
response or something, which
Yes.
I think solves Martin's problem.
Yes, so it should be paired with a response. The response could be, like, if I send multiple requests, you could just send, you still have the addresses you had before, get over it. But you could also just wait, like you probably do have to handle a timeout where this side just isn't responding to you.
So I think that helps. I don't think it completely addresses the suite of problems that are now possible. So in the case that you ask for, say you ask for one address or two addresses and the server says, no, you can't have either of them, I think it's reasonable to have either an error message coming back or even just address assign empty.
Yeah.
Which is perfectly reasonable. But it is very, very difficult to distinguish between a positive address assignment for something that you requested, particularly in the 0-0 case where you really don't care what you get, and a spontaneous advertisement of addresses that are coming through.
Does it matter?
And Jonathan behind me is saying request IDs.
So I mean,
from the client perspective, am I still waiting is still a question that I cannot resolve, except for the empty case, because the empty case will never happen except in response to
that's
a request.
true. But so I mean, one property of these I want to make sure we're clear on is that an address assigned capsule is, maybe we should be clear about this, like inclusive of all of the addresses you're assigned now. Like,
So it's cumulative?
So if we have it be cumulative, which I think we probably need to clarify, then it is unambiguous that when you receive it, this is all of the addresses you have. And so it doesn't really matter at that point, like if there is a race, like maybe I'll end up getting two of them that are duplicates if you want to generate an extra one in response to me, but they are fully describing.
And at that point, if the client has requested an arbitrary address,
you could
it
say,
doesn't care.
no,
It
I give you this other one instead.
So say I request one address and it's an arbitrary one. I don't care which one it is. I get an address back.
That's the
How do I distinguish between that being a spontaneous advertisement on the part of the server and a response to my request?
I would argue that you wouldn't care, and you may get another response that's just a duplicate of that capsule of like,
But
by
that's
the way, you
okay.
got this, and you'd be like, oh, I guess that first one was spontaneous, but I've already moved on.
Okay, I think I can probably see how that would work out. Yeah.
Yeah, we should clarify that.
None
case.
of that was written down. I couldn't answer
Yes,
that question.
it
based
was
on
not
the
written
pull
down.
request.
It was not written down before.
Magnus Westlund. I want to try to respond to Ben's ask about the CRRTT cases initially. I don't think they work currently. I don't think you can do, I think we need some type of extension saying that, hey, I'm going to send you a packet with a source address. Please rewrite. I think that actually ends up being something you need to signal explicit, because otherwise you end up in, or use the 00 or something. We need to specify something for. We can't leave it as it now.
So I believe that you could absolutely specify an extension that, or a behavior in here if we want to add it in that says, if I send from 00, I assume it's going to be the default thing you assign me. But honestly, I don't even know if it's V4 or V6. I think it's really messy.
Yeah.
But so I think the one thing you can do now is, if you know about an address, you could request the address.
Yes.
You know you have a target because that's a specific address you asked to connect to. You could try sending on it.
Yeah.
There's a chance that they will assign you no address or a different address, and then that was the case where you'll have to retransmit your packet or whatever you do normally. But that one gets through.
Yeah, I understand that case.
Okay,
but
so that is the one case where you get 0 RTT.
Yes, yeah,
so.
well, yeah. But I think when you responded to Ben before, it sounded much wider that basic anything would work, and I think that's wrong. You need to have some really high probability that you know what the address is going to be to make this work. Or we need to have something, either specified behavior or an extension.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's like, I think when I was talking about the more open things, like if you have the site-to-site VPN case where
sure.
they
But
have their own IP address that they assign to themselves, then like, it's
But
probably
in
free-for-all,
normal
it's fine.
VPN case, when you are saying, hey, give me an address, you have to wait for a response before you start sending packets.
Which is the case with all remote access VPNs today.
Yes.
Anyway, but if this is a large enough tunnel that I'm going to be able to send my entire device's IP traffic over this, that one RTT is, I think, okay. And if I'm doing very specific flows, I probably have a previous address I can request.
So, yeah, Ben Schwartz, I still don't think it actually works.
What?
Like so imagine that I'm trying to optimistically send before I have the address assigned.
Yep.
So I set my source address to all zeros.
I'm not saying that case.
And then I get that's
that needs an extension to do something like that.
So okay, so then yeah, so right now then there's no way to just like connect and immediately send an IP packet in the way that there is in Connect UDP.
No, if I have a previous address, so let's say I have one quick tunnel to my Connect IP server, and I've previously opened other streams. I've already opened an SCTP stream to that host, and I've opened an SCTP stream to this other host. Well, I can just say, give me another SCTP stream from the same address. I can try sending on it.
I mean, I guess you can try, but
Yes.
there's no reason to expect that the client would be assigned consistent IP addresses across those different tunnels.
But you are requesting it. And so for example, like even the way we use Connect UDP today with our Masque servers, like there are lots of reasons on the web for within one tunnel to give a consistent IP address, because lots of websites, for example, will freak out if you start changing IP addresses on every single connection within different resources. So I think it is reasonable, and this may be kind of a deployment specific, like the sides need to learn what is consistent in behavior, but I think it's very reasonable for a proxy to be able to assign you a consistent IP address as long as it has it available.
Okay, I mean, we're way outside the HTTP resource model now, right? We're like this.
Sorry, I mean, I meant more different hosts. So like for example, like there are pages where like I load the main page and then they have their login resource, which is a different host name, and if it comes from a different IP address, they hail it immediately.
I understand. I just mean like every targeted Connect IP tunnel is a separate HTTP resource. In principle, they're like, there's no particular reason why they should have this like state correlation across them where they somehow assign.
Sure, which is why it's a request.
IP addresses.
And like we can't guarantee it, but optimistically, it's something that you
I mean,
can do.
I think
really
you're right that it's probably just not that important. I don't personally really know why why you would want a targeted Connect IP tunnel anyway. But so I think we should just be very clear that basically zero RTT is not really supported.
I don't think that's the way I would summarize it. It's just like, it is just kind of the Wild West, and you can request something and you can be optimistic about it, but.
So the Wild West is what I'm trying to avoid, because the weird thing you end up with is like, I picked a random IP address for the source address, and I didn't guess right. I didn't guess what I got back in the
Picking
address
a random one
assigned.
is a very good way to probably fail to get.
So
the
like,
right
this is my
answers,
question. Are source addresses allowed to be rewritten, or is there a rule, like if the address assigned comes back and the source IP I set wasn't on the list, was my packet delivered? Was it rewritten or was it dropped? I don't have any explicit indications.
Well, if you send something, you should get an ICMP error if it doesn't like what you did.
Okay, so that's great.
That's
I
what
would
it
like,
should say.
if we have a hard rule that
Yes,
says like
yeah.
either your packet is
If it
delivered
dropped
or you
you,
get an,
yeah, that's what the other text was about to say. You should get an ICMP error in that case.
okay,
Then it's clear.
then it's
You know,
clear.
yeah.
So I have not cut the queue because I think it's important that we close on this to make some progress, but please do try to keep things
I think
brief.
this is the last slide. It's the last big one.
So I wanted to reply to Ben and actually try to clarify some of the things which I think there's some confusion here. So there's a couple different modes of using Connect IP. And I think broadly speaking, the dynamically assigned open VPN case, zero RTT is almost never going to work because you're going to be assigning these IP addresses to a virtual network device on the host OS anyway. So I personally consider their zero RTT to not be a priority or a goal. So I think the place where the zero RTT optimistic packet sending thing there makes more sense when you're doing one of the targeted tunnels, either because it's a UDP user space thing or something like that. And there, particularly if the client already has a long established H3 connection, which already has multiple such targeted Connect IP tunnels, with high probability, it's going to be load balanced to the same process, modular intermediaries, in which case it already has in memory the address assignments for that client, and it is very, very, very likely, in fact, almost certain for most reasonable implementations, it's going to reuse the same IP address for that particular client.
It's not guaranteed.
It's not
So
guaranteed.
you have to get an error back if in case it doesn't work.
So if you want to use, I mean, if you believe this, then it should be a should.
If you what?
I think it already is a should. Like, I thought we already have it in text here that if a client asks for an IP, we should give it back, but like we might not, right? Like there's no guarantee because it might already be
It could
given
fail.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to mention here is that you never have a guarantee of packet delivery here if it went over a datagram. So like even to your earlier comment of like, I'd like to get back an ICMP error, if it was lost somewhere on path, you're not going to get it. So all of those things around the other commentary around like, is it going to be rewritten with an extension? If we have that in the future, like you could imagine having an extension of like, please go rewrite to my target IP, where I might send you garbage source bits. And if that gets sent before the packet is processed, then yes, you should expect that that would work. But that's not currently defined in the base.
Exactly. Exactly. Cool. Oh, we do have one more. I think this is already covered. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Mike.
Mia Kulevan again. I have a question regarding this idea we had about sending an empty address assign if you don't want to give the client an address or yeah. Why
If you
would
wanna-
you do that? I mean, why don't you?
probably
If you
more
don't
real-
want to give the client an address, then just close the connection, right?
Yeah, more realistically, you just close the stream.
I think that's a better option.
That's a good point. Thank you.
So actually, this is relevant to what I wanted to ask. I think part of the earlier discussion, we changed something that's not currently in the PR, but I think is a good change, which is to say that now address assign is cumulative.
Yes.
And
That's what I was
no, I
pointing
know,
out, yeah.
and I'm going to write it, and that solves some of these problems. So let's say, you know, if I'm only assigning you 1 instead of 2, like you can see that. So that's nice. I just want.
Yes.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yes, this,
I-
this solves unassigned, which was
Oh,
there
that's
before.
great. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Bingo.
Yeah. All right. That's even better. So that. All right. Oh, sorry. Jonathan was saying that that allows you to remove addresses, and I'll add a sentence that says that actually, because why not?
Right. And like, I think it should still be permissible to assign only 0 addresses because potentially in a site-to-site VPN case, there may be a moment when all connectivity is lost and then they bring it back online and you don't necessarily need to tear down your quick streams.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't think it should be forbidden to do that.
Yeah, I don't think we need to say anything. Let's say, yeah. Cool. Okay. No, I just wanted to make sure because that was kind of a non-trivial change to the PR that we had, the editors had agreed to. I just want to make sure that no one objects to that, but it does seem to solve quite a few things nicely. And on top of that, it becomes fully consistent with route advertisement, which is just next.
Exactly. Yep. So the last bit here, this is essentially already covered in our discussion we just had. Like, if you need to send the packets, you need to wait for address assign route advertisement. If you want to know when it is time to send address assign, you wait for an address request. I think it's very clear. Just the one last thing I'll mention, which we believe is not in scope for this document, but if you are trying to extend Connect IP and you want to have fancy new capsules that do things to affect your routes and addresses, and those are like super important about the ordering, you need to be concerned about the ordering or have a way to batch them. But that is left as an exercise to those extensions to deal with, and it does not need to have any complexity into the base Connect IP draft. And that is the last thing I have. So unless someone has a point on that, we can move on to the rest of the agenda. So close all the issues. Woo. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you, Tommy. Next up, we have Ben. Do you want to share slides? Do you want me to share slides? Cool. Cool.
Magic slides thing.
Thank you all for the engagement on that. By the way, we're very close to the kind of end of the issues list for Connect IP. So this is excellent to make some good progress. Access service description first.
Okay.
Sweet.
Okay, hello. HTTP access service description objects next. So the backdrop here is that although it's clear how we describe and convey and configure a Connect UDP endpoint or a Connect IP endpoint, the services that we're really interested in, I think, are likely to be more complicated than that. They're likely to have multiple components. So I think that it's reasonably likely that you'll have Connect UDP and Connect IP and DO all offered essentially as a package, meaning tied to the same user accounts, intended to be used together as a service. I think it's reasonably likely that you could have a DO resolver that's associated with an old-fashioned Connect TCP proxy. I think that there are a bunch of these different combinations of these services that I think, are going to want to be able to configure, convey in a standardized way. Next. And so the realization for me is that although we have, I think, all these different potential use cases, they actually are all instances of a single, pretty simple general problem. We need a machine that takes as an input a URL or an origin, or, could be just kind of a string. And its output has one or more of these different kinds of services that we've begun to define, both here in Masque and in OHI, and potentially anything else that is an access service, a thing that you would want to use as a component of a larger access service that helps you get access to something else on the internet. Okay, next. So the thing I'm proposing here is a really dead simple JSON format, and the easiest way to talk about it is to just look at one. So like here is an access service description of a proxy. This proxy has a DO server, a Connect UDP endpoint, a Connect IP endpoint, and an OHI relay. And so like rather than saying, oh, client, your user interface has like 4 different text entry fields, and you're supposed to go in and paste one after another all of the different URI templates for all of these different services. We can say, look, we're standardizing a format, and so your user interface has a single input field, and that is maybe a URL hosting a file like this, maybe even literally a file picker, and if this thing is actually a file that's being passed around. Next. Here's another example. This is how oblivious DO would be represented in this. So again, we're tying a DOE service to some other kinds of access services, in this case, a gateway, which helps you get to that DOE endpoint. And again, it's just a very simple JSON format. Next. So the idea for this draft is that probably access services, all these different sort of composite services that I've been talking about, are generally identified by a URL, and that is the URL of an access service description. It's a URL that you send a GET request to, and it sends you back a JSON object. Except there are some cases where that doesn't work, where for a legacy reason or for interoperability with some other system, the only identifier we have is an origin or a host name. We can't use a URL as our initial identifier. And so in that case, we use .well-known. We say this thing lives on a .well-known. Next. Okay, so like we can solve any problem by introducing an extra level of indirection. And so this is just a level of indirection. Instead of passing connect UDP URI templates around, we pass around a file containing, well, a URL of a file containing connect UDP templates. And I think there's a bunch of useful stuff that this enables. Like you can, if you want to do fast HTTP3 bootstrap, you need, you arguably need HTTPS records. You need to be able to query HTTPS records out of the DNS, but you can't do that unless you actually have a DNS server that you can use. The proxy can't do, a Connect UDP proxy can't do that for you. So you want a DOE server associated with your Connect UDP proxy, because the whole point of Connect UDP is to be able to use HTTP3. So we can enable that. We can enable encrypted client hello through a proxy. And we can make that work even for these sort of legacy cases, like the ones that we were talking about just an hour ago, where our bootstrap input is a host name because we're stuck in the legacy world where we're configuring old-fashioned proxies that aren't a full URL. There's some growing interest, seemingly, in client-side DNSSEC validation. That's another case where the client needs direct DNS access that a proxy like Connect UDP doesn't offer. I also think there's another sort of category of interesting ways that this can be useful, and that is helping the client to learn more about the capabilities of the access service. So, for example, we're about to talk about Connect UDP in listener mode. There's currently no real way to discover whether a given Connect UDP instance supports listener mode. You could try it and just see what happens, but as we've often argued, the requests that you make to a specific resource are only valid for that one request, right? So you got an HTTP 500, but you don't know that you're always going to get a 500 talking to that. And even if you sort of are willing to buy that you can sort of probe for the capability to find out if it exists, it certainly seems like more work than just being told at startup, like, here's the capabilities of this thing. You can evolve the capabilities of your service, right? You can start by launching a Connect UDP server, and then you can add Connect IP later, and you don't need to go and re-provision all of the clients that you've ever onboarded, right? They can just reload the configuration URL. So, and finally, this format is sort of a perfect fit for key consistency double check, which I was talking about yesterday in OHI, because again, that's a case where we need to grab something like an oblivious DOE configuration as a, and essentially treat it as an atomic unit. And so here we have a format for representing those as an atomic unit. So I think this is a useful thing. It's dead simple, and I think Masque would be a good place to work on it.
Before we get too deep into the queue, we have a timer on screen, which is for both of your presentations. I figured I'd let you allocate time to whichever one you wanted.
Okay.
Great. Quickly, Martin Duke, Google, thank you for thinking this through. Thank you for bringing it to the working group. In our infinite wisdom, we specifically excluded proxy discovery from the charter. Doesn't mean we can't recharter it, of course. I'd be interested in the communities to use if Masque is the right venue for this, or one of the many other working groups that this would touch. Thanks.
All right, Tommy Polly. So thanks for bringing this up. I think it's a very important conversation to have. In general, I feel like I should like this direction, and like, you know, certainly in the deployment we have of Masque, we have config files that say this is a thing that is a OHTTP relay and a connect proxy and a connect UDP proxy. It's like it feels similar. However, like I'm not convinced about this particular shape for it. I think it's combining more than we need to, particularly about like locations and keys and capabilities trying to all be in one JSON thing. It's like both too much information that's available to everyone in one flat way that may not be specific enough, but there's also not enough information to actually be fully useful for each of these use cases. Regarding the scope of working group, I think if we have a version of this that is just about Masque proxying, like things that proxy end-to-end connections, but not OHTTP and not DNS, then that can belong in Masque, but I'm not convinced about it being in Masque if it's trying to do all of these things. I think it needs a much broader audience unless we turn Masque into the all things oblivious and proxied working group, which is I don't know if that's even a transport thing anymore. Specifically around here, as I mentioned, like I'm concerned about keys. Like when we find like, you know, your key rotation scheme and your key management scheme may be something that for your OHTTP server is distributed in a different way such that the person maintaining this one big file now needs to worry about the key rotation management of a bunch of different services that I think ends up being quite complex. I think also, you know, a lot of people aren't going to be running fully open proxies. Like it's one thing to say, I'm a proxy, but even today, like on the internet, like you're not going to have a proxy that you don't have authentication to that just lets you do, like here I just have connect UDP, connect OHTTP, just like the whole world. I think anything around this would need a lot of like ACLs of like, I allow OHTTP relays to these gateways, or like a lot more specificity, which feels like they need to be separate configs for those different protocols and also be related to an authentication source. So like if I'm a client who has authentication to use this particular proxy in this manner, I have access to these services. But people who are just random people who typed in a string into their browser should not have the full capability. So these are just some of the questions it raises. And so I think we need more discussion and more work on it. And I lean towards trying to understand the in-depth use cases for the different protocols before we try to combine them all together.
Jonathan Lennox, yeah, I think my theory sort of similarly, but more narrowly, since this is configuring things from, I think at least 4 different working groups and possibly 5, I'm dubious whether you could do them all in one as opposed to each working group defining its own configuration. Maybe like you'd have some, here's the bucket to put things in, and then each working group would do how you configure its protocol. But I'm dubious about, you know, defining things for OHI or deprive in this working group.
David Skenazy, Google, privacy of all the things enthusiast. So first comment is I can kind of see how this is useful, but I can't see anyone actually using it. Who would use this?
Sure. So the easiest example for me is that the use case I'm principally targeting here is exactly the use case that we were just talking about with the .well-known URI the fixed .well-known template for connect IP. So like that's the simple case where you've provisioned a bunch of devices and they have authorization to use an HTTP connect TCP proxy, and you want to augment that with a bunch of extra services. And so the way we've started to try to do that is by saying, okay, for each extra service, we're going to define a new path on .well-known, and that's going to be, we're going to define a URI template that lives under .well-known, and then that's going to control the structure of all the connect UDP and connect IP requests that you generate. My view is that those are not good solutions. As I mentioned earlier, they have a bunch of problems. For example, they break the HTTP model of request, because if I make a request if I populate that URI template in order to issue a request, and I get back a 404 or something, like all that says is that that one particular URI doesn't exist. It doesn't tell me that whether the URI template itself is valid or whether there's some other set of inputs that I could put in that would actually work. That also it means that I need to find out the capabilities of this thing. I need to send a bunch of different probes. I need to separately probe all of the different capabilities that I'm interested in. I can't just ask what are the capabilities associated with my local proxy. So that to me is like a very simple use case. And moving forward, I think that our proxy configurations will not limit us to host names. We'll be able to configure whole URLs. And so, I imagine going into my settings menu and saying, I want to set my system proxy to this URL. And that URL, looks more or less like what I described. It has TCP, UDP, IP, OHI, and DO all in it. And any of those can change later. And, there's a standard, so my phone knows. And for authentication, probably, there's some kind of like OAuth authentication flow. It's a unified authentication for all of those services. So I OAuth once, and that those credentials then are used across all of these services, so I don't have to re-authenticate to all of them. That's what I'm thinking of.
So that's a description of what you can do with this,
Yeah.
not of who's going to do something with it. But anyway, I've taken it up enough of the time. We're almost done. I would want to see people interested in implementing this before we.
Sure. I mean, I'm interested in implementing this on Android, for example. I would like this to be an Android system setting so that I can drop into Android and say, like, under my VPN settings, I'd like to have a Masque VPN setting where I can drop in essentially one of these URLs and then not just get Connect IP, but get the whole suite of access services associated with one of these complex services.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Then to the second question, because this touches on DO, on OHI, on DNSSEC, I don't think that Masque is necessarily the right place. I think that the layer that this operates over is HTTP. You're describing all the things that you can do with HTTP, though DNSSEC sticks out on the side. But
that's just sort of an enabled behavior. There's no connection to DNSSEC.
Okay, so I think maybe, but HTTP this might be a better fit. Jonathan said dispatch, and actually I agree with that.
Okay. Well, it looks like I don't have time to talk about the other slides, so I guess we'll talk about those some other time.
Do you want to drain the last two folks, or totally up to you?
Sorry, sure.
So Mike Bishop, I'll be very brief. Respectfully disagreeing that this is not actually discovery of the proxy. This is discovery of the proxy's abilities once you've been configured with a proxy. So I think there is a lot of value because no typical user is going to know, oh, this supports UDP, but it doesn't support IP, and it does support oblivious HTTP. Who even knows what these things are outside of this building? You give it a host name, it lights up interesting privacy services. I think this is useful. I think the question of crossing groups is easily solved by it has an IANA registry. Each group can register their own config thing, and it's just a list of supported services at this host name. Now, does it belong here? Does it belong in dispatch? I don't know. All of these are reasonable. Somebody needs to define it, and everybody else needs to register.
Alex Janowski here. Actually, Mike just said what I wanted to say much better. I mostly wanted to say that one of the things that I was seeing with Connect IP is that we've continuously had a discussion that people probably want Connect IP and Connect UDP proxies to actually be hidden. So I think deciding whether or not this is a discovery system or a capability system is actually a very good point. And one of the things which I find would be very interesting is if whatever mechanism we choose, this JSON file, potentially one of them is what happens if it's behind an authenticated HTTP barrier, right? Like you probably don't want to go and tell someone what the capabilities of this proxy are until after you know that you're willing to serve them, and you might be willing to serve different capabilities to different classes of authentication. And I think wherever this ends up going, we should probably think about that as well.
Sorry, just really, really short. One thing just for when we're thinking about some of the questions going forward, David was asking like, who will use this? And I actually, completely get from the client side, like, yeah, I would love to use that. I think the question we want to answer collectively is on server proxy ends, because they're the ones who have to publish this. Who is deploying these sets of things, and what things are they willing to lump, and what are their requirements on client authentication or other things like that? And those are the people who we need in this conversation, who I haven't heard yet here.
All right. Our last set of slides before we talk about rechartering and our little bit at the end.
All right, and I have 8 minutes.
Yes, indeed.
Cool, everyone. I'm David Skenazy, and so this is a draft that came out of a conversation with Tommy, where we were talking mainly about Connect IP, and I don't even remember what specifically we were arguing about, doesn't matter, but Tommy mentioned, oh, I'm going to run WebRTC over Connect IP. And I thought, that sounds wrong. And Tommy was like, well, no, it's super easy. I inject my user space IP stack right underneath my user space UDP stack underneath my stuff, and boom, it just works. Look, I even have a demo, and that's kind of cool. But my thinking was maybe we can do something simpler that is just a small extension to Connect UDP. So that's what this draft is. But at the end of the day, like the question that I'm asking the working group the most is, which direction do we want to take for browsers doing WebRTC over Masque? Do we want an extension to Connect UDP, or do we want to use Connect IP? That's the real question for the working group. I'm going to quickly run you through. Next slide, please. Connect UDP is great, but it only allows connecting one 5-tuple. So that works when you're only talking to one target, but that doesn't work for WebRTC. Next slide, please. So let's see how this works. So the way it works today, Alice talks to the stun server. The stun server is also talking to Bob. It tells Bob Alice's address, and then Alice and Bob could talk directly. Of course, there's a lot more positive complication, but for the purpose of this, that's what matters. Next slide, please. And they can have their very interesting voice call. Next slide. So now if we have a proxy in the mix that we want to do Masque with, Alice is going through the proxy for everything. The proxy talks to the stun server. The stun server tells Bob the address of the proxy. Bob talks to the proxy. Next slide, please. And they can have, this time, their very interesting voice call again. Next slide. So, the feeling I got when Tommy proposed Connect IP, it was like, okay, if you look at it the right way, Connect IP is a hammer. But maybe it's not the best tool for this job. Mainly because, speaking for Chrome, we don't have a user space IP stack or user space UDP stack in there. I'm willing to bet dinner that Firefox doesn't either. And on top of that, you need to have every datagram carry UDP and IP headers, which is a bit silly when all you need is the UDP payload and some addressing information. Next slide. So we do Connect UDP. It's great. Get a bundle of slides, and it's Connect UDP that allows you to talk to multiple targets from the same source. Next slide. So how does it work? This part doesn't really matter because this is so early in the draft, but all you need to do is for the path that we've had before, you send stars instead of a target when you get started to say, and then you have a Connect UDP listen header. We should byte shed this name, but not today. And then instead of just sending UDP payload, yeah, this registers a context ID, which was the extensibility mechanism built into Connect UDP. And then you use that context ID, and when that's present, you send your IP address and UDP port with its datagram. So when you're sending from the client, that gives you the target from when the proxy gets it, it sends it to that target. When it gets something from a target, it puts those fields in there when it sends it to the client, so it knows what the source was. Dirt simple, and that allows you to build stuff on top of it, and as usual, it's turtles all the way down. Next slide. And so, discuss. I mainly want to hear about this versus Connect IP, but any other questions on this? Do we think this is reasonable? Where do we go from here? All right. Jonathan is first.
Yep. So is this sufficient that I could run an HTTPS server, HTTP3 server on my, and get incoming connections?
Yes.
Does that mean we need this for TCP also?
So that would probably require an extension to regular Connect as opposed to Connect UDP. So I'm not particularly interested in that.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like this is the sort of thing where, we're probably already setting, as soon as any IT person in the world hears about these protocols, their hair is on fire. This is, adds gasoline to their hair. So.
No, thanks. I hadn't thought about using it like that. That's evil. I love it. Tommy?
So looking at this, I think this is simple and straightforward. And the problem with the Connect IP variant of it is that you don't really have a port allocation service. And so you get too much on this. So I think this is cleaner for that regard. So I think we should just adopt it and do it. And I think it's a very nice extension. And it's actually the most compelling extension I've seen to actually use a context ID. And I really want to have WebRTC work over this.
Cool. Yeah, for probably similar reasons I do. Ben.
Hi. So I do want this. I don't think it's as simple as it looks. I made some comments on the list about some ways in which it's doing it right is going to be a little more complicated. On the point about running servers, this thing is basically Turn, and so we should take a good look at Turn. One of the things that Turn, I believe, does is make some recommendations about the kinds of NAT policy that servers ought to offer. It basically says that you should do address restricted NAT. I think we don't need to make a strong recommendation, but we should remind people to think about NAT.
No, that's a good point. The way I've been thinking about it in terms of WebRTC, this doesn't do all of Turn because it doesn't tell you which public address imported and assigned, but that's something we could actually encode in the HTTP response pretty easily if we wanted to. And then the way I think about it, it's I think full code NAT. I never remember which kind of NAT is which. All right. Anyway, at the end of the day, it's a NAT where you're sending stuff to your Masque proxy and it's coming out with another address and then it's doing that mapping. And you have just one NAT binding in this case, but it's such a way that multiple people can respond. Martin?
Debbie Downer again. Yet another ambiguous thing in the charter, like server-initiated services are out of scope.
That's not server initiated. That's the client asking for it. That is just as client initiated as the Connect UDP is.
Client.
So Tommy said not at the mic. This is less server initiated than Connect IP, and I have to agree.
Okay. All right, that's a reasonable. Like I said, to me, it's more ambiguous than that, but nevertheless, I think that's a valid interpretation. If this is better than Connect IP, so we can fix it, but I think we'll have to consider that a little bit and see if anyone.
That's fair. And then as soon as I drain the queue, we're going to move on to the privacy charter conversation. So maybe tighten that text so there's no ambiguity there. Cool. Marianne? Oh, sorry, Lucas, who's remote. Wow.
Can you hear me?
Yes. How are you feeling?
Yes. Okay. I think this extension is neat in the sense that it's a fairly small extension on top of something we already have that's already been running in production services for while and enable something that is useful while we work on Connect UDP. It's complementary. Yeah, there's some technical stuff we need to sort out, but I would support this doing this work. If it doesn't quite fit the charter as written, I think that's a great thing to think about for the charter considerations. How do we maintain and extend drafts we published or will imminently publish? Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucas. I'll state my opinions on the charter and in the charter section. Miriam?
Yeah, it does feel like a nice hack to me. And then
A nice what? Sorry, speak
hack.
closer.
So, but like, I'm wondering why, like, if this is a hack, then the right solution would be Connect IP. And like, if you want port numbers, then have an extension to get port numbers on Connect IP. Like, why doesn't Connect IP give you what you want?
Well, because it's oodles of complexity that are not needed. And trust me, if this is a hack, don't tell anyone, but all of Masque is a hack. We're proxying everything over HTTP, and we got away with it.
But what's the additional complexity? I mean, maybe you actually want this complexity to make sure that like addresses are agreed in the right way and we have error handling and all these things.
No, but it's just such not the right tool for the job. Like, I don't have an IP stack in my browser.
Yeah.
All right, let's. No, I know that we because of WebRTC we already pulled SCTP and DTLS, but you know, let's not add more. Anyway, Magnus.
Yeah, I think the biggest one of the questions here is, and I think we shouldn't take too hard on the historical precedents here, but I mean there were reasons why Turn was endpoint dependent filtering. You had to open up towards addresses you knew through the signaling. I think that's probably fine to release, but just understanding that you basically open up and I think that's fine, probably, but it's a change from what we've done before in this space. So
That's a good point, and actually that's a policy thing that we could totally say in the spec. It wouldn't change any of the encoding, but that's a good point. We should think about that, and you have more expertise than I do on turn stuff, so I agree. All right, that's it from me on this one. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you, David. All right, we've come to the fun part of things. So, as David noted earlier, both HTTP datagrams and Connect UDP are now in the RFC editor queue. So a huge, massive thanks to everybody here and remote for all of the discussion and really good engagement and reviews of those documents. They underwent significant evolution from their inception to where they are now, and that's awesome. So thank you all for that. You should be super proud of that. Connect IP is our last remaining item there, and we're making some pretty good progress on that. We've made good progress so far in our last 2 hours right here. So we're gonna keep iterating on that, trying to achieve interop, close out as many of the issues as we can, and once we've got some good interop and the issues are drained, we're gonna try to move that along in the process, which means it is now time to talk about rechartering. So, in what I hope is not a super controversial statement, but let me know if it is, Masque is not intended to be a long-lived working group. So I see a thumbs up from the audience. So that means that there are places where we might extend functionality within Quick or within HTTP, and there are long-lived working groups to handle long-term maintenance of some of those things. And we're trying to talk about right now kind of what is the boundary? Where do we say we've done the initial set of things that we need for Masque, and anything for maintenance beyond this can be deferred to one of the kind of more broadly scoped groups? So far, we've been thinking that anything that's super specific to proxying and to make Masque actually work in the real world makes sense to do here. So we've had a lot of discussions so far in the initial kind of generic underpinnings of Masque as we define them. And as part of those discussions, we've had a number of different people propose things that we say, oh yes, this can be done as an extension. And we want to make sure that there is a time and a space to talk about those things. And so that's kind of what we're proposing the next phase of rechartering for Masque looks like. As part of that, if we're going to talk about doing some of these extensions that we've brought up previously, we need to decide within our charter, do we want to explicitly name extensions? Do we want to say we're going to do a timestamp extension as a random example? Do we want to instead offer some criteria for extensions and say we want to do extensions of this type? Do we want to be completely open-ended and say we think that there's a small list of extensions that people actually need and are planning to deploy, and that's going to kind of run itself down once we get to a place where most people are, happy that we have a deployable thing, and then we'll close things down. So that's something that we'd really, really like some feedback on. The core underlying principle that I think we're proposing and that I'd love to discuss right now, in addition to what kind of criteria we should lay out, but the core principle that I think we're currently going for is we want to include things in this charter that are needed to make Masque actually work for real in the real world with real people. So if there's a thing that you need that is, okay, I take the core spec and I add this extension and that makes my use case that we discussed when we were first bringing up Masque in our long list of different use cases, that's something that we kind of want to make sure that we address. If it's not making Masque work, it's not for real people, or it's not in the real world, the current proposal is that we keep that out of the next charter. That has one big asterisk next to it, which is around discovery and proxy discovery, because people do kind of need to do some form of that. Sometimes that means there's a text field you type something into. And so we can talk about that. So I see we have 2 people in the queue. We're going to open it up for hop in the queue now. This is the happy moment to express your opinions, but the things we're most interested in focusing on are, first, what kind of criteria should we have for what we want to include, what is in scope for our next set of work and out of scope? 2, are there specific things that we need in order to make Masque work in the real world that we haven't thought about? And 3, is there anything from this list that we're missing? David, you're first.
Thanks. And I would love to see our AD in the queue to get their thoughts on this at some point. Or then again, we'll get their thoughts when we try to change the charter anyway. But so my general take on this is when you start new work, it's very important for the charter to be extremely tight. So we don't go around doing crazy things, and we agree on very small set of deliverables that we get done, I would say quickly, but I guess 2 years is quickly. So we had a great charter. However, now that we're done with those, deciding what we want to work on next, to me, should be a matter of who wants to do the work, who wants to write documents, who wants to implement this, who's going to use this. And I don't think that we need the help of the charter to scope us down, that if we tighten it too much, it would get in our way. So I would recommend to be very open in terms of extensions to Connect UDP or Connect IP are all on the table. Things like discovery is on the table. The other things you phrased as how do I make this shit work is on the table. Maybe if someone wants to write an ops document of how do you run a fleet of Masque proxies, that could be on the table. And then our gate for whether we work on something or not is the adoption call. Of course, I would like to see what the ISG has to say about that, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who decide. But that would be my personal preference.
Tommy?
All right. So, I mean, I definitely think that opening up for extensions is important. I agree that we should not name specific extensions. I think the main reason for that is we just saw the first presentation about an extension on UDP listening, and I think that's very important. And we just got that now. That does we will find something else, and we don't want to preclude it. It may be worth mentioning in the charter, other than just open-ended extensions of all types, suggested areas. And it's some of the things that just came to mind are one thing, we want to make sure we have enough extensions to use the extensibility points we've created, like context IDs. The UDP listen one uses that, but making sure we exercise the mechanisms we've defined is a good goal. Adding extensions to do obvious functional proxying things like UDP listen, this is a new functional capability of a proxy that was missing. I think that's a very obvious category. And then also things that make this proxying more efficient. I think that includes compression, or we have our stuff for forwarding, but there's like things to make this stuff work faster or make sure you can do the 0 RTT requests. I think that's another category of good benefit. Since it's open-ended and we don't want this to be a forever working group, maybe one suggestion would be to have like a time box to reevaluate, to say like, we will operate in this mode for 2 years or 3 years. ISG can decide for how long, and then we will reevaluate how those extensions are going and decide to say, yes, this is active, or like, no, these have become this trailing edge and we need to stop. But give ourselves a box. With regards to discovery, I'm okay leaving it out for now because I think that is a much broader discussion than we need for this group, but I could be convinced otherwise if people are very passionate about that belonging here. But I think it's good to have a place where we can talk about the protocol bits.
Well, Spencer Dawkins, gosh, you all are so good at generating questions before I get to the mic. I want to make sure I understood you correctly when you were saying, you said 2 things back to back, and you were talking about maintenance going to other working groups like HTTP, HTTP or wherever. Was that is your intention that the Masque specification, the Masque Connect specifications would go to the appropriate working group, wherever that is, for maintenance, and especially as y'all are starting to get deployment experience from outside the original implementer community?
Yeah, so 2-part answer. The first part is that the line for where we draw that line is something that we'd like feedback on, right? I think that's something we want to agree on as a working group. So it may be that we say, you know what, we're going to keep things in Masque until we've got significant, outside the IETF deployment experience so we can respond to things.
Yeah.
We say, no, that's okay. Connect and extended connect are ostensibly part of HTTP, and it's okay to have an umbrella group, especially given our shared constituency here and there. But I think the long-term answer is we spun up this group in part originally because we wanted to get a mix of audiences, especially as we're talking about things like IP proxying and some more transport folks there. But the mechanisms themselves and some of that long-term maintenance, we've been envisioning being able to route correctly, for lack of a better term, to the appropriate working groups in long-term.
Thank you. My second comment was about locating things. And I understand that that's a Masque thing for Masque, but if I'm understanding the conversation correctly, it was also a mock thing for mock this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm remembering correctly, we've gone through a couple of rounds of chartering working groups where discovery was out, was out of scope. And I feel like somebody's going to have to be able to discover something somehow, eventually, at some point. So whether that happens here or somewhere else or in the right place, that's that would not be my call. But I would encourage people to think about that more, and and to support proposals for putting discovery in the right place. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, keep it super quick, Ben, and then Magnus, if you still want to talk, let's go.
I don't think anybody knows what discovery means. And I think that that's probably because it doesn't actually make sense in the context of Masque. You don't discover a Masque server. I think configuration is important, unsurprisingly, and should be in scope. I think client authorization, as we've just been discussing, is important and should be in scope. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, sir. Magnus.
Yeah, not that much. I do support it. There are going to be a plethora of extensions that we need to support here, and just try to figure out this during the next, up to the next meeting, I think. Give us some time there to think about what we actually want to do. So.
Sounds good. And it would be great to send notes to the list as to, hey, this is an extension we were thinking of.
30 seconds, I promise.
Yes.
I'm inclined to recharter. I do not have strong convictions about the technical content of that recharter. except that we're not, as people said, we're not chartering Masque M. And I think the key thing here is figuring out, like, I think there will be extension proposals forever. And I think we have to figure out what is the off-ramp to hand those extension proposals to the other steward working groups here. And I'd be interested, I mean, I think the time box is like a coarse way of doing that, but I think we need to figure out maybe something a little more substantive there on what our exit criteria are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all. Have a great rest of your evening in plenary.
I would rather have, because like, oh, should be, oh, my goodness, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I do short, that we short, if we need something for like, privacy proxying and off, maybe that is.
Relay ops.